You're listening to Death of the Reader Flex and Herds here, our second week discussing All the Tears in China by Sulari Gentill, dear friend of the show, who we were very delighted to have on. And Herds, we are discussing chapters 15 to 27 today. This is your last week to nail down what is happening for your points next week.
It's my last chance for greatness.
This book, Herds, has just gone from being fantastic to fantastica to fantasticest. Just the further we get in, I love the way that the action in this story happens, because so much of the time this book feels kind of like the old original James Bond stories, where we have just a small cast of characters, normally just Rowland, just going around Shanghai, slow paces, you know, letting things happen step by step.
Very slow.
But then when it kicks in,
boom!
Whoo!
Doors explode, apparently.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Oh my
That's
God.
Great. I'm really enjoying reading this novel. I want to say the door exploding is a great moment, but it's the scene that happens immediately afterwards is possibly my favorite scene with the Jewish German doctor who patches up Rowland, and it is revealed that he has a burn scar in the shape of a swastika on his chest. It's insane.
Yep.
That entire scene is like my mind was exploding. I love what Sulari Gentill has done here. I love this historical aspects of this book, and I love that we have even more suspects now. You know, that's also great.
You have said, Hertz, you expect that this book will at least follow a little bit of Knox.
It's true.
So it surely cannot be one of our new suspects.
I hope not. That would be a problem for me. I mean, that's just bad storytelling. Okay, Sulari, come on. If you're gonna rob points from me, I'm just saying.
Yeah, personal attack going on right there.
I'd be in trouble.
Have to lump you in with the Sean Brittons of the world.
It's true. We are basically the same person. Let's be entirely real here. I'll get him next time.
So over the course of this series of chapters, we go from finding out the small little details that, you know, Rowland is being suspected by the police inspector Randolph.
Oh my goodness,
to then finding out that Randolph has basically been going around the city slandering him and telling to the victim's brother that Rowland Sinclair did it, resulting in Rowland being clocked over the head with a violin.
Oh, it's so
then
good.
The victim's brother's house exploding. Like, it's so frantic in summary, but the way that it is paced out in the actual book is so well structured. I just love it.
I love that so much. I don't think that it is going to be the policeman who is the killer. I don't think that is a trope that's going to be employed in this book, but it's like he's trying to get Rowland killed at this point.
Yep.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I really enjoy the way that the detective is played directly against the police in this story, to the point that when Sinclair, towards the latter half of this part of the story, he comes up to, you know, the Inspector Randolph, and he says, I found this evidence that I think might be correct. And the inspector's like, what do you mean you found evidence? It's like, well, I've been doing my own investigation. Like, what do you mean you've been doing your own investigation? He's like, well, I want you to stop suspecting me. He's like, the fact that these characters are so directly opposed is kind of refreshing.
Yeah. I also like the way that Sulari has written it in such that rather than being your standard amateur detective, where it is someone who is just openly a detective, they're like, yes, I am an unpaid detective. I operate outside the law and all that stuff. Whereas it feels very much like Rowland Sinclair is the kind of character who's like, oh no, I'm in trouble again. It's the politics. It's come back to bite me. Guess I got to prove myself innocent again.
I mean, he's just a regular guy, right? He's not even like, oh no, I'm a washed up amateur detective. He's just a guy, and he has to rely on his own wits and the help of his friends.
His own wits and his extensive wealth.
Yes, his extensive wealth. Those are all very helpful things. I mean, to be fair, if he wasn't able to pay his friends, you know, to help him out, especially his driver, who knows where he'd be.
I think it's particularly highlighted in the scene that we had where they go to Wing's debtor, and basically Rowland's just like, oh yeah, I'll just send you a check, where Wing spent months trying to avoid them and hiding out and getting work to try pay it off, and Rowland's just like, don't worry. I got you.
Even in the conversation with the gang boss, who says, I can imagine him like smoking. He's like smoking opium, and he's like wreathed in all the smoke, and like got his bodyguards. It's like a really intimidating scene. He says, you will pay double the usual price, and everyone is like, oh no, does that mean he's gonna take fingers? And they're like, no, that means you pay double the usual price. And he's like, oh, that's not so bad. I could, that's fine. That sounds very scary, Mr. Gang Boss, paying more capitalist wealth that I have so little of. Here you go. Like, that entire exchange is so, it's like dry humor. It really is something you can kind of seep in.
The other thing that's excellent about this section of the book is actually starting to get into the whole wool trading business, which sounds, I appreciate,
very boring,
very dry and boring. But the way that it is used is really interesting, where we start to look at the politics of it when Mr. Gilbert Carmel comes in and says, well, once your brothers sign that deal, everyone's going to sign the deal. And it's a very interesting look at how the Japanese were viewed at the time in terms of the embargoes that were about to be imposed on them, but also all of the businesses that were trying to just reap that money out of it while they still could.
Before World War II hits. I love that we got this scene with all of these different nationalities in one room, because we have the Australian Rowland Sinclair and the Japanese wool traders, and this German man, sits down, and he's kind of like, he's polite, and Rowland kind of goes along with it. But the second that the Heil Hitler comes out, Rowland's like, this is a problem. This is like, I don't think I can work with Nazis. And the interpreters don't know German, so Rowland Sinclair says in German, so nobody else in the room knows what he's saying. He says, so where do your allegiances lie with the Nazis? And it's like it's a very pointed question. And it really breaks the tension of that scene.
Yeah, for sure. And there's also like this great, I think, sentiment that the book has where, we as the reader obviously know what the era was going to lead to.
Yeah, for sure.
And it feels like the book and the characters within do as well. Like, even though it has this, I guess, open-mindedness to how people felt about it, it's still presented in this way where you're like, this doesn't really like line up. And there's all of these sidelines, such as when I believe it's Alistair goes away and leaves a note for Rowland, basically saying like, well, don't do anything stupid because there's something going on behind the scenes. There's always this under the table menace which this book has that I really love.
Alistair the spy, I believe. Yeah. No, I loved that he's being told, Rowland, take it from the professionals, don't do anything stupid. But like, he's clearly already, just by virtue of being in Shanghai, involved in this mess. And it seems like everyone else is as well, to some degree or another, except for maybe Mickey with her pet monkey.
Yeah, I guess we should talk about that.
I think we should.
She's actually first introduced to us in the newspaper clippings that are at the top of every chapter in this book.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, isn't it? That I'm going to have a very interesting time looking into how much of this is real and how much of it is made up for the book. Because it's quite a lot, right? There's one at the start of every single chapter. There's a different newspaper clipping, and there's all these characters who are real. Like, that Buddhist monk is a real person, and Mickey is a real person, and the cafe is a real hotel. Like, there's all sorts of details to kind of sift through.
The other very interesting thing, Victor Sassoon as a character, I'm really not sure what to think of him in terms of the overall structure of the story.
He doesn't do much.
Yeah, he's this very upper class, well-to-do sir who owns the Cathay Hotel, and he seems to have this very, flatly laid out opinion that Rowland Sinclair did not commit the crime, even though we don't quite know why he believes that, which is very suspicious. But at the same time, he doesn't seem to do a lot in the story. His reputation in the story is wealthy man, gives them house, also might have monkey testicles. That's like the three defining things we know about him from this story, and I'm curious as to whether we're going to get any more.
Let's be clear, it's not monkey testicles, it's testicles with baboon meat slid inside of them. But
right. Very important distinction.
Look, I'm just making sure that we're 100% correct about how our baboon testicles and how they work. But he's always there. He's always kind of representative of, I guess, like Western influence. And this whole idea of just, there's politics in Shanghai and I'm going to keep out of it. And I want you to stay as far away from me as possible, Mr. Murder Suspect. I just don't want to deal with it. that's very much the kind of the commentary that I see there.
It's so strange. Anyhow, Herds, we should wrap this here and throw back over to the incredible Sulari Gentill. This is Death of the Reader. We are discussing All the Tears in China by Sulari Gentill, and we'll be back with her in just a second. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here with you. We are talking Sulari Gentill's All the Tears in China. On the line right now, we are joined by Sulari for the second week here discussing this book. And last week we finished off talking about the cultural influences that culminated in all of these spectacular characters like Mickey Han, who we were talking about earlier on this episode. And Herds, you wanted to ask a bit more about Du Yusheng.
Yeah, I think that in many ways, murder mystery is one of the best genres to explore a foreign country, because murder mystery is so much about uncovering the truth and showing, how this culture really is. Now, you mentioned Du Yusheng, and I have to take this up with you now, because our favorite murder mystery author, S.S. Van Dyne, warned in his, I'm throwing a flex at you, warned in his tenets of crime fiction that including a crime organization, Illuminati-style organizations such as Du Yusheng's, can undermine the pure intellect of crime fiction. Now, why, Sulari, did you decide to ruin your book by including these things?
Well, because I didn't. This one of the things I was adamant that I wouldn't do was write a book set in China and not include Chinese figures. So the Rowland Sinclair series takes a great deal of pleasure in pulling real characters from history into its vortex of each story. Du Yusheng communicates, I think, part of that culture that I wanted people to understand. So he is from an ancient tradition of warlords and respect. He dressed as a scholar. And I did wanted to give a sense of the fact that the Chinese in Shanghai also had their own structures and their own norms and their own ways of dealing with things, their own criminals and their own venerated people, their own religions. And Du Yusheng gave us a glimpse of how that worked. And it would be cowardly to write a book that purported to be looking at the underworld of Shanghai without mentioning him.
Yeah.
Well, it's also a murder mystery book. Like, it deals with crime inherently, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's what we see as crime and how we deal with crime is different in terms of culture. And so it would be like writing a book that was set in Italy and purported to talk about crime and the underworld without any mention of the mafia. It would be something missing. But I also did, I was also quite fascinated by Du Yusheng's life and who he was as a person and where he came from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was one of the great things about Du Yusheng's first appearance, is that it just it took the scale from trade deal with Rowland's brother to murder mystery to crime syndicate. And that was such a great step up on the kind of slowly progressing scale of issues that the novel was dealing with. And one thing we've been speaking on the show recently about is how to manage scale. And when you start dealing with big issues, how do you focus on the characters and the direct elements of the story? So how do you make sure that big scale issues don't end up just smothering the details of the story?
Because big scale issues are expressed through human beings. I mean, the big scale issues always sit over my books. So the books essentially are between the war books, and they're looking at how we basically ended up in World War II. So you're talking about big scale issues, big scale movements, fascism, communism, big issues of where people stand. As much as the book is about those big world global movements, it's where Rowland stands in terms of those great big global movements that is at play often in the plots. I mean, sometimes it doesn't resolve. I think with this book in particular, Rowland is asked by one of the characters what makes him choose what's happening in Germany as his cause. Why is that more important to him than, say, the plight of the indigenous people in his own country? In the end, in the face of all these big issues, you're looking at human and personal choices. Everybody chooses. They choose what cause they will fight for or what they will fight first for.
You've said that you write these novels kind of organically, and that question that Rowland has of like, why do you fight for this or how do you fight for this is constantly challenged from book to book. You've written 10 of these novels so far, and theoretically you could keep going to 25 or 30 if you really wanted to. I wanted to know, though, our favorite character by far is Wing Zau. We think that he's an excellent example of how to provide characterization, beautiful characterization without long walls of adjectives. Do you have certain methods that you like to stick with that help introduce characters like Wing as an example? And the German doctor whose name escapes me as well stuck out, especially when you have so many books and you're trying to thread these moral questions in with each. Do you have any tricks for that?
Quite often the tricks that I see in retrospect. I'm not aware of it when I'm actually writing. So quite often, a character comes in because they need to fill a place in the narrative. So Wing Zau was necessary in this novel because Rowland does not speak Cantonese or Mandarin. So if he was going to communicate in China to Chinese people, he needed a translator, and not just in terms of language, but in terms of knowing how the society worked. And it's a shortcut method to bring in a character who can help your outsider character actually navigate. Because if you naturally in a novel allowed them to learn their way around a society, well, then that lends itself to a lot of boring passages.
Yeah. One of the best moments for him in the book was just him looking out towards the sun as it was, illuminating the apartment in gold, and seeing him as an emotive character really just looking off into the distance. And I think that it's a great example of how that kind of juxtaposition between the very direct and purposeful use of him as a character compared to the kind of emotional core of him as a patriot, as an individual who's kind of been shoved to the side of society in many ways. It was just such a touching moment that really highlighted how well his character had been implemented to the story in that way.
Oh, I think Wing Zau there's always certain peripheral characters that expand of their own accord. And it's hard to tell why they do that. It doesn't feel like it's an intention on my part. It feels like they have a volition of their own.
Yeah.
So I have this vague theory that somewhere in my subconscious someone is balancing all these things to make the story work, to pull characters out into the fore and push other characters back to keep the balance of the novel right. And whoever it is in my subconscious that's doing this doesn't bother to tell me about it. I'm not even aware of what the novel needs until it's filled. Wing challenges a lot of preconceptions about China, about education, about their Chinese awareness, and also things like a political drive. Quite often when we're talking about other countries, we don't really think of peripheral characters as having political drives and moral contemplations and moral dilemmas of their own. And Wing allowed that. Wing came to the fore with his own contradictory history. He was a Chinese man and a patriot and a communist, and yet he had been educated in the West. He had gone to university in Boston and studied there, so he knew how to be a Western gentleman if he chose to be one. And it's that complete adeptness and proficiency that I wanted to bring across in Wing Zau, who was essentially working as a butler. But behind that was this amazing education and this amazing will and amazing knowledge and history.
Sulari, thank you once again for joining us here on Death of the Reader. We will have you back one more time on the final episode of this run, All the Tears in China. We cannot wait to talk more about this book, its conclusion, and particularly about the next book, A Testament of Character, which you have just released. Can't wait for that.
Thank you very much for having me. Can't wait to come back.
You're listening to Death of the Reader. This is Flex and Hertz here on your Murder Mystery World Tour, discussing Sulari Gentill's All the Tears in China, chapters 15 to 27. This is your moment, Herds. This is the moment in which you are going to tell us exactly what has happened in this crime, who did it, how done it, why done it, for your points on the show next week. The floor is yours, sir. Who killed Alexandra Romanova?
I will tell you, I have a solid grasp on the who. I think that there is only one character who is suspicious enough and follows the, techniques of a murderer enough that I'm pretty confident. The why, I'm sort of on. The how, I don't know how much the how matters. That's the thing I'm going to hedge my bets on. I'll let you know, I believe the killer to be a gentleman by the name of Gilbert Carmel. He is a lawyer. He's supposed to be a good friend of Rowland Sinclair, and dare I say would definitely know that he was coming to Shanghai, which is part of my reasoning here. I think that all of this communist stuff is very important to establish the political landscape, but I think that a lot of it is a smokescreen. I've pretty much thrown out my theory about Nikolai since last time, partly just because of how much time we spent with him, and also how he seems like he's far too obviously interested. He's far too interested in Edna to be the killer. But anyway, I think that it is Gilbert Carmel. The thing that kind of pinged me on him is that he is really adamant, and this gets more intense as this part of the novel goes on. I didn't really think about it much because there are so many conversations in which he just says, and then Rowland explained everything, and Carmel also explained everything, and then we move on. But that also happens far too frequently.
No, that's true.
I think that he's secretly a Nazi. Which is the part that I was so confused about.
Are you then accusing Wilfred Sinclair of sending his brother to Shanghai to perhaps get murdered for being a communist?
No. I think that is a happy coincidence. I think that Gilbert Carmel actually wanted to catch Wilfred initially because, as I mentioned last week on the show, when he first gets to Shanghai, there's a bunch of guys trying to kidnap him and they speak in German. And the only thing, now that we've had the German doctor and the Nazi wool traders and all of these other German characters, I think this is an exploration of their intentions before World War II. I think that Carmel is a secret Nazi and he wants to disrupt this wool deal with Japan because, as he says, once Rowland initiates the deal with the Japanese, then everyone else is going to be on it, and that trade tie between Australia and Japan is going to be much stronger.
So you are blaming the sheep?
Yes.
For the Rising Sun war plan.
Yes.
That is...
I think that Carmel...
My goodness.
I'm having a hard time justifying that Carmel is a Nazi, but I can tell he's working with the Germans. That is a clear thing to me. And so obviously Carmel, who is aware, of course, of Rowland's movements, ordered the burning down of Alexei's house, the explosion of his house. I don't think he's dead, mind you. I think he's going to come back later because there was no body.
Standard murder mystery play.
Yeah, that's my feeling there. But yeah, I think that when we get to the end of it, Carmel's going to turn out to be a Nazi, and that this is all to prevent an Australian-Japan alliance.
I mean, as I was saying last week on the show, Herds, there was really just no limit to the horizon of how far you could take this theory. I think you've gotten pretty close to what many people would have considered the limit. Bringing a theory up as enormously scaled as this is kind of crazy, but also fabulously the opportunity that a book with a character like Sinclair affords you. Just saying that your detective just happens to be one of the wealthiest wool traders in Australia and that's going to scale up. I can neither confirm nor deny your theory, Herds, but I gotta let you know I absolutely love it.
I have to assume I'm close, and if I'm not close, then Sulari, come over here. I have a concept for a book that we should write. But yeah, I have to assume that's where it's going. Like, it's set in Shanghai, which is a global boiling pot. We've talked about so many different of these like huge concepts, like the Hitler Youth and World War II is being foreshadowed. Like, I have to assume that that's where this is leading.
It is a little weird. Like, I back your theory in its broad sense and the implications, but it does make the entire ordeal seem very impersonal, which is interesting considering how direct and almost intimate the setup with Alexandra Romanova was.
I think that only exacerbates the tragedy of the death of this Russian princess. I know that we haven't had it like officially confirmed at this point in the story. I'm not saying that, but we literally had the phonograph play out and somebody in the back said, "Oh, Your Majesty, that might have even been Alexei. That might have been him."
Why, if it was him, would they be, using titles like Your Majesty if they're trying to, stay low? That's a little strange.
Because someone's a dummy. Someone said something bad at the wrong time, is the answer to that. Yeah, I think that it is just going to be that victim by association. I think that's where this is going. Like, in the same way that Rowland Sinclair is victim by association to Egon Kitsch, right? I think that's going to play into the tragedy of her death, that she is the missing Russian princess, and that's how Sulari Gentill is actually going to tie things into the real world, that like we believe that she had died, but we're not really sure the circumstances, that sort of thing.
It makes it sound very spy novel, Herds. It makes it sound very distinctly anti-Van Dyne.
I mean, I'm okay with that.
I'm always okay with busting Van Dyne open. But, to bust out the 13 secret societies, mafias, and all have no place in a detective story, and just throwing that out the window with just the entire Nazi political strategy, that is a bold play, sir. That is a bold, bold play.
I think that's kind of how things are going to wrap around. I think that Alistair being is he American? Is he Australian? I don't actually, it doesn't matter. He's, the Western spy. Shh. It doesn't, look, the details don't matter in a murder mystery story.
No, absolutely not. They wouldn't dare do such a thing.
Shh. But I think that giving Alistair, a place in the story that is subtle, yet foreshadowing of events later, when Rowland realizes, I see, that Carmel was a Nazi spy all along. I think that would be really perfect. Like, there are so many characters that are sketchy or cagey or like a little bit dangerous, especially the gang. But I think that in order to find a culprit that fits with this novel, we have to go for something larger scale. And Nazi Germany preventing an alliance between Australia and Japan is the only thing I can think of.
The question I then have, Herds, is you said that you thought this was going to follow Knox and Chandler of our two rule sets.
Okay. What have I broken?
I won't go down Knox because I think it's plausible and doesn't really, get close enough to any of those. The curious one I have is the 9th Chandler rule, that the novel must punish the criminal in one way or another, and not necessarily by operation of the law.
Yeah.
If you are accusing just Nazis collective of being responsible for this crime, how do we satisfy the 9th rule?
I mean, they get punished in World War II. I don't know if you've read history book.
Right.
But I think that in this circumstance, that the murderer, like, that's the larger political landscape, but the murderer here is going to be Carmel, and I think that he will get his comeuppance, because there's a distinction here between the broader organization that is literally like millions of people and one individual doing a bad thing, right? And I think that Carmel and his like Nazi goons, the guys who tried to kidnap Rowland Sinclair at the beginning of the story, will get their comeuppance possibly in a hammy fight scene where we realize that Randolph was really a good guy all along. But I don't think I don't think that we are going to literally punish all of Nazi Germany in this story, especially because that would be very reductive and against the story that has been laid down before this.
Hertz, I think you have done an excellent job. I'm very excited to see this come around next week. Oh, what a pleasure it has been watching you solve this story.
It's crazy. This entire novel is amazing. I've loved it.
It is absolutely insane. I don't think I've ever felt so out of scale with a novel and so satisfied at being as such.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to the finale. I'm going to read it right after this ends. So let's see how we go. Let's see how many points I get, if any.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Death of the Reader. We will be discussing the final chapters to the very end of All the Tears in China next week on the show. Herds,
Flex.
I wish you good rest. I hope that you don't have sleepless nights fretting about the answers here.
I definitely will. Spoiler alert.
We will see you then. You're listening to 2SER.